Hi, this is Anna Crowe with the Get Real podcast, where CEOs, CMOs, and communications experts share their real advice. It's 5 questions under 9 minutes because we get to it real fast. So let's get to it. I'm so excited to have today's guest on. In a few sentences, could you please tell us who you are and what you do?
Absolutely, Anna, and thanks so much for having me. I'm Jayme Rubenstein. I'm the Global Public Relations Director for ResMed. That's a global leader in digital health and connected medical devices. Think the nearly 1 billion people worldwide who suffer from sleep apnea every night, as well as millions, hundreds of millions living with COPD, asthma, and other chronic respiratory conditions. And then there's millions of Americans who rely on out-of-hospital care in nursing homes, senior living centers, skilled nursing facilities, home health, and hospice. We provide software solutions and easy to use medical devices that are connected to all these folks so that they can sleep, breathe, and live better lives.
You guys do such powerful work, and I'm so excited to talk to you and being part of such an incredible organization. You mentioned connectivity, obviously connected devices, but this podcast is a little bit about that from a different angle. We talk a lot about connections and specifically getting real and having authentic connections. I hear from other leaders that creating authentic connections, whether it's customers or employees even, can be challenging when it's very noisy out there. What's your take on that, Jayme?
So there's 3 things that I can say to that. The first is when we think about communications planning and strategy, we first want to be audience centered. And that means, and I'm glad you mentioned employees too, that is not an audience to overlook. When you think about talking to employees within a company, as well as all your external stakeholders, your end users, consumers, patients in ours and many companies' cases, partners, investors, you always want to make sure that when you're talking about your company, a new product or service or a piece of news about your company's growth, what is the value to them? How does this impact them? How are they going to feel better at the end of the day? Is it going to create a better lifestyle that they're striving for? Let that guide the story that you tell. So it's not about the company and from the company's perspective, but how are we enriching all of your lives? And then the second thing that I would say there is, it's very important for us to be aware of the multiple channels on which we can tell our stories today. I always try as hard as I can to keep up with all these platforms because traditionally communications was done in a very one-way street kind of manner. You had a press release or some other announcement and you tried to tell as many people out in the world as possible that it existed. Well, today, there are opportunities for us to engage directly with customers, consumers, and so many other folks, including employees, in a two-way manner on social media, through internal communications platforms like intranets, and we should be embracing these opportunities to create real conversations that allow for our authentic voice as a brand, as a company, to come through to people who are asking us real questions about how this affects them. That's really, I think, what helps create that brand trust and brand loyalty among all of our audiences. The third thing to keep in mind is that, and I think this is the real holy grail in communications, is not so much getting our story out there to as many people as we can, but how many people can we get to tell our story for us in a positive manner? Again, there are so many ways that people can do that today through their own video channels, podcasts and vidcasts, their own social influential platforms, and that's just to name a few. But if we do our job as brand experts and communications experts to tell a positive story that connects authentically with audiences inside and outside our company, eventually they'll start telling those stories as well on our behalf.
Absolutely. And I love all 3 points, but just starting with the value add, it's so important. I love the word storytelling, as I'm sure, we can discuss that topic for hours, but, leading with value versus attributes. Everybody's got an attribute. Every product company has an attribute, but what's the value? And the two-way communication The authentic piece is so strong there, because you're right. It's not just about speaking at your customers. It's listening, communicating, and creating that trust, because you are able to have the genuine feedback and the genuine conversations, which can create that loyalty with customers. So, love all of that. Do you have any other real advice for our viewers and listeners? Is there anything else that you think is really important?
It's a really good question. And, I and others in the industry are always learning. There are always new tools and always new opportunities for professional development that we need to keep an eye out for. There are two that I would flag in terms of pieces of advice that I've learned at this point in my career. The number one is listen. Listen particularly not only to your external audiences, but to the people you work alongside with, the ones who are creating, developing, and rolling out the products and services that drive the revenue for your company, and those who are outlining the business goals around them. If we anchor our communications plans, I think, around what the business objective is, instead of simply one instinct that I fell into when I started in this in-house communications portion of my career is I said, we have a new product. All right, what's the biggest, best thing about it? I'm really going to try and hone in on that and create news around it. If we focus instead on what we're trying to create for the business around that product, it becomes a much more holistic strategic plan. And if we go back to listening to our external audiences and highlight the value that we're creating for them through introducing this new whatever it is, then we create an authentic voice with which to tell that story. So listening is something that I remind myself still every day. Start and end with that, and your comms plan will organically grow in a positive way out of that.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I would say, and I think we've all gotten a huge stark reminder of this during the COVID pandemic, is be flexible. Be flexible when plans change, when goals change within your company. I will tell you that ResMed, a global company that was born out of creating sleep apnea devices, CPAP machines for people with sleep apnea. And that is today the core of our business. Although we help address so many other disease states and so many other demands for out-of-hospital care, sleep apnea is still a major concentration of what we do. Ventilators, which we make, have traditionally been less than 10% of our business revenue. You can imagine how important ventilators became for ResMed and our customers as soon as COVID struck, and the demand for those devices hit unprecedented levels. So we had to not only shift our business to accommodate that and to help save as many lives as we could, but we had to shift our communications around what are we doing as a business to meet this demand? Why is it important? And how are we upholding that demand while at the same time still serving hundreds of millions of people worldwide that rely still on all of our other products and services? So flexibility allowed us to do that on a global scale. And I'm very proud of what our entire communications and commercial teams have achieved in that sense.
Yeah, you guys have done some fantastic work. And I was obviously, from a PR perspective, listening and reading and understanding. And the cool thing about the flexibility piece that you mentioned, and in the wake of this pandemic, is there was also not a lot of time, right? So sometimes you've got to be flexible because the opportunity is now and the need is now. It's not, you can't plan a year out. It's got to happen pretty quickly. So I think the flexibility piece is really important there too. Yeah. Because maybe something you created yesterday or built out as a strategy yesterday now has to shift, pivot, and be implemented sooner than later. So
yeah,
I think
and hopefully you have the communications plan to accommodate for that. You always want to buy an umbrella on a sunny day, not the rainy day, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I would be remiss to say too, I'm proud of the way that we've been able to tell our story as a company, but prouder still of the story itself. Being able to create 150,000 plus ventilators in a 6-month period is something ResMed's never done before. And when you put those in hospitals and homes, you've potentially saved hundreds of thousands of lives of people suffering from the respiratory symptoms of COVID-19. And we remind ourselves of that every day. I'm I'm very lucky to work for a company that's been able to have that type of an impact.
So incredible, and such a testament to the strength of the organization and the team you have there. So kudos to all of that, of course. I also wanted to highlight real quick the point about listening, and I'm sure you would agree that the active part of the listening is so important, and more important than ever before, because there is so much noise out there and there are so many conversations, and you can have a conversation, but if you really actively hear what the person is trying to say or to communicate, whether it's an employee, colleague, or a customer, I think that definitely makes all the difference versus trying to come up with something to say or have a response right to it.
Yeah, agreed.
Very cool. Well, before we get to the last part, which is about how you got started, are there any other successful executives such as yourself that you would like to acknowledge on this podcast or give a shout out to?
Absolutely. There are so many great connected medical device companies right here in San Diego. It's a heck of a hub of people who are involved in life-changing work. And one of those who I'd want to shout out to is Dexcom. They make constant glucose monitors for people with diabetes, particularly type 1 diabetes. I myself am a type 1 diabetic, and I've been wearing a Dexcom CGM for the last 3 years. Now, I'm not shouting out to them on this podcast because they make a life-changing product, which they do, but I've got to give them kudos for their communications and the way that they've created a community of online patient ambassadors through their Dexcom Warrior program. Being a user myself, I go on social media or I watch the Super Bowl and see an exciting ad with Nick Jonas wearing this device and talking about what it means to them. They've created a community that I feel a part of. That gives me pride. It gives me motivation to stay on top of my own treatment, which in essence helps me improve my health outcomes and my overall health and life outlook. And so that's the power that a communications campaign can have, particularly when you're getting people, again, to talk on your behalf and tell your company's story. I feel an immense amount of pride when I put that product on.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, well, our last question is more of a fun one. You've had a wonderful career with ResMed and other companies. Could you tell us how you got started?
Sure. It's always been communications for me. I started over 15, almost 20 years ago as a general assignment news reporter for an El Paso, Texas station. I was actually living and working up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, out of our station's New Mexico mobile newsroom, which meant that I was working out of a van every day, often shooting my own footage as well. And it was a great experience for me. I made lifelong friends. I can't wait to be able to go back to New Mexico and visit them as well. But I would say that one thing that I took from that experience that's relevant to our conversation is, I was telling stories every day about taxes or education, crime and punishment, the environment, every day a new topic. But I had to bring it back to how it affected my viewers. Regardless the headline, if there's a 3-alarm fire, there's your headline. There was a 3-alarm fire downtown today. But how does that affect the people who are watching your nightly newscast? And I always had to write from their perspective and tell them what to do or think about that information. And that's something that I've tried as hard as I can to transfer back to my present day work as an in-house communications expert. And again, I would urge everyone watching to try and do that as well. Put the person who's going to consume the story that you're telling at the very center of that story, and you will organically create an impact that they can really connect with.
I love that story. And you probably got a lot of the sense of urgency from that job as well, I would assume.
Oh, yeah.
News.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think back to every day you wake up and you have absolutely nothing, a clean slate. And by 4 o'clock, you've got to produce something that is Emmy Award winning. Mm-hmm. And that sense of urgency, you can flick that on like a switch today when you work in a PR position like we do. And I think that that's an invaluable practice trait for us to have.
Yep, I agree. Well, very cool. Jayme, how can people get a hold of you or learn about ResMed or what you're doing?
Sure. The best way is you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can write an email to news@resmed.com, and I would love to connect with you and talk more.
Fantastic. Well, I so appreciate you joining, and thanks everyone for tuning in. This is Anna Crowe. For more insights, visit us at crowepr.com. Thanks so much. Make it a great day.